In this video, we're going to review some of the new features and enhancements that have been added to Aspire version 4. We're going to start by giving you a quick guide to the changes in the interface. Then we're going to work on the part you can see on the screen here that will allow us to demonstrate some of the changes to the vector drawing tools, some powerful new additions to modelling such as Extrude and Weave and Add Draft, and also the enhancements to the toolpath calculation and previewing. There is a second video available that shows you some of the features that we're not going to cover in this particular example. Let's start by opening a new copy of the software. So let's begin by creating a new file. For this example, we're going to set up a job which is 15 inches by 15 inches, has a material thickness of ½ an inch. We'll set the datum in the centre of the job while we're doing the design layout. Let's set the modelling resolution to high and hit the OK button. When you first come into Aspire 4, you may notice some changes to the interface. On all the different tabs in the program, the icons have been much more intuitively grouped together to make it easier to find the function you're looking for. On the Drawing tab, as well as the icons being adjusted, we've also moved the location of where you access the layers. If we come up here, you can see that our active layer is being displayed to us. If I click on the down arrow, then I actually get access to a small version of the layer manager. In here I have all the ability in order to add, change and manipulate the layers in my part. If we close this, in addition to access to the layers through this area on the Drawing tab, the layers now have a tab all of their own. If we come down to the bottom here, and I click on the Layers tab, you can see that all my layers in the part would be displayed in this area. Again, I'd get access to changing things like the colour and many other functions by clicking on the box at the end here, as well as reordering the layers from within this area of the software. Let's come down and click on the Modelling tab. On here you'll see the major change is the component tree is now in the bottom half of the tab where it used to be a list at the top. This gives us more space to display all the components in the part. And let's come up and click on the icon to go over to the Toolpath tab, and here you'll see there's been a similar change in the toolpath list. Again, is now at the bottom of the tab here, giving us more space to display our toolpaths. The icons have been redesigned and reorganized again to make it easier to find the toolpath function you're looking for. And at the top there's a really nice addition where we now display a summary of your material setup information so that you can visually check this without necessarily having to go in and do the setup for it before you calculate a toolpath. Let's come back down and click on the icon, which will take us back over to the Modelling tab. I'm going to come down and click on the Drawing tab again. Now we've had a quick look at the interface changes, let's go ahead and start creating some geometry for our part. I'm going to create a couple of circles, one which is 6½ inches in diameter, one which is 9 inches in diameter. Next I'm going to sketch a couple of polylines. I'm going to click to the side node here of the inner circle and then sketch a line which is at a 15-degree angle. Then click and stretch another one here which is at 15 degrees as well. Next I'd like to take a large circle and move it down to snap the top node here to the intersection point of those two lines. This is something that would not have been possible in the previous version of the software, and that's because in version 4 you've had some significant enhancements to the snapping options available. If I come up and click on a shape, click on it again to go into the transform mode, you'll see now that all the handles are slightly offset from the vector itself, which allows me to come over this point here and actually click in order to select on that point itself rather than accidentally picking up the handle which is going to resize it. This is the same for all vectors and vector groups. So if I come over this point here, the cursor changes to tell me I'm going to snap. I can click, drag this down, and then as I get to the intersection point you can see I get a different cursor, and that's now showing me that that point that I snapped on is going to snap to the intersection of those two lines. If I click and let go, I know that'll be exactly in the right place. What I can do now is just hit escape to go out of transform mode. I'm going to select these two lines and delete them. Let's go ahead and reselect our large circle. And I want to make 3 copies of this arrayed around the center of the job in a circle. You'll notice if we come down to the offset array and nest section here, we now have two icons for the array tool. Before, this was in a single function. We have create linear array and circular array, so I can click to create a circular array. I'm going to make 3 copies in my circle. Another new option in the array tools is the ability to group the copies together. In this case, I don't want to do that because I'm going to go ahead and trim them afterwards. Let's hit copy and close. And now I'm going to come over and click on the icon to trim vectors. Make sure rejoin trim sections is selected and just click in order to trim off the large outer portions of the circle so that we've got the main shapes that we're going to work with here, and these have all been joined together as per the selection in the form there. Now let's sketch another piece of construction geometry taking advantage of the snapping. I'm going to draw a polyline, snap to the top node here, come out and snap to create a horizontal line, click and right mouse click to accept it. Click on this again to go into transform mode, come over the middle here and click to snap to that, and then bring that over and snap again to the top node here. Next, with that vector selected, I'm going to click to create another circular array, and I'm just going to hit copy and take the same parameters that we had entered before and close. Now what I'd like to do is trim off each of those corners, and then I'm going to show you a new tool where we can extend a vector. So let's use the icon to trim these vectors here. I'm going to click on each of these corners in order to trim them back to those lines that we just created. Then just going to select each of these lines and delete them so make it easier to see what's happening. And now what I want to do is come over and click on the icon here to extend vectors. This is a new tool in Aspire 4. We click on this, what it allows me to do is go over a vector in the part here, and you can see I get this dotted line showing me the extension of that vector. If I want, I can click in order to lock that in place, then come over another line, and if the two intersect, it'll show me that intersection point. I can click again in order to accept that and create my extended vectors. Let's just repeat that, come over the line here, click to lock it, come over here and click to build that shape, over here, click, here and click and close, and now what I've got is 3 separate vectors that we've extended there to their common intersection points, and with those selected I'm going to come over and click on the icon to join them together, and we'll just hit join there and close so that now we've got a closed vector in that position. We're going to use these vectors that we've created as the drive rails for a modelling function that's new to Aspire 4 called Extrude and Weave. This also requires us to have a cross-section shape as well, so I'm going to sketch that now using the Draw Arc tool. Let's come over and click on the icon to draw an arc, and you'll notice in here that there are a number of additional options that have been added in this version of the software. Here I'm just going to use the through 3 points. I'm going to zoom into the middle here, and I'm just going to sketch an arc there, and then snap to the end and sketch another arc there. Doesn't matter if it's not exactly in the middle. I'm going to right mouse click to accept that, select both of those arcs and click on the icon to join them together. Now I want to create a mirror of the other side of those, so I'm going to click on the mirror selected objects, and again here you'll see there's some additional options that have been added to this form as well. We now have the ability to flip about the job center and also to flip about a line. I'm not going to show you those here, but I wanted to point them out as they're really useful layout tools. Here with our vector selected, I'm just going to check the option to create a mirrored copy and hit the right button and close. I'm going to select both of these, click on the icon again to close those vectors or join them together by moving the endpoints. So now we have our cross-section shape. I'm going to select this, and I'd just like to check the size and perhaps scale it. So I'm going to come over and click on the icon to set selected object size. Here we can see it's a little over 1 inch, and you'll notice in addition to the set size form here and to some of the other transform functions is the ability to use a percentage rather than a specific size. So here for instance, if we wanted to, we could perhaps scale this down, say we wanted it to be 70% of its original size, hit apply and close. So now we've got a cross section which is around 0.8 of an inch across. Next, let's come over and click on the icon to zoom to fit so we can see everything in the 2D view. Now I need to make sure that I've got space around each of the corners of the part in order to create my shape. So I'm just going to click and drag a box to select all the vectors, and I'm going to center the bounding box of these vectors in the middle of my job. Let's come over and click on the icon to align selected objects. When we go into here, you'll notice that there's a number of icons that used to be directly on the Drawing tab. These are now all contained within the alignment tools here, and the reason that they had to be moved is that there are some additional very useful options. Not only can we now align to the inside edge of vectors, but we can also align to the outside edge as well. Also at the bottom here you can see we can take a selection of vectors and space them out within the part or within a vector. Here all I want to do is just align my selected vectors and the bounding box of those in the middle of my job, so I'm going to click on the option in the middle at the top here. Let's go ahead and hit the close button. Now we're ready to go over to the Modeling tab and create our shape. Let's click on the Modeling tab. Let's just click in the 2D view to deselect the vectors and click on the icon here to tile the windows so we can see the 2D view on the left and the 3D view on the right. Now we're ready to create our component, and we're going to use the Extrude and Weave tool to do this, which is a new function in Aspire 4. This is located under the third icon under the Modeling tools. If we click on this, the first thing we need to do is select vectors that are going to act as our drive rail or drive rails. A good way to think of this function is like a single rail sweep. So we just need vectors that are going to represent the center of our extruded shape. So I'm going to select the circle and then hold Shift and select this vector here, and then click on the button to use selection. It'll indicate that they're selected by turning them orange, putting a green node at the start point, and arrowheads showing me the direction of each of those vectors. Next, let's go ahead and select our cross section. So this is the shape that we extruded along our rails, and let's just come down, enter a name for our shape and hit apply so you can see what this will create. Now you can see how that cross section we drew is being extruded along those vectors that we selected for the drive rails. There are various options within the form here that will adjust the shape. For instance, we could turn off create square corners, hit apply, and see that that will round off these corners rather than taking them to a point. I'm just going to switch that back on again. In addition, we have the ability, where the vectors cross over, instead of them just intersecting the shape together like this, that the software will actually raise and lower the different parts of our extrusion so that it appears that the shape is weaving as it's extruded along the drive rails. To activate this, we can click on the option here to weave under over at crossings. I'm just going to choose the add base option and hit apply, and you can see that now the software has adjusted the shape. If we look, rotate this in the 3D view so that it appears as if our cross section is actually weaving up and down, over and under where those vectors cross over. So looking at this, you can get a sense of what a powerful tool this is. Certainly in previous versions of Aspire, it would have been very difficult and time consuming to try and build a model like the one that we've created here from some fairly simple vectors. And we've barely scratched the surface of what this tool is capable of. It's possible to use multiple cross sections along a curve, different cross sections on each different line, and also even to use components in order to extrude them along a curve as well. All of this will be covered in detail in the full documentation of the software. Let's go ahead in this stage and just hit the close button on the form in order to create our new component. Next, I'd like to show you another new modelling tool, which is the ability to add a draft angle to components' edges. I'm going to select my component we just created, click on the properties icon and adjust the height to be 0.5 of an inch and the base height to be 0.4 of an inch, so we've got a nice vertical edge that will make it easier to demonstrate this. I'm going to hit close and just deselect that. We're going to come up and click on the icon to add draft to model. This is going to just add draft to all visible components, so essentially what you can see in your 3D view. So you don't select anything in order to apply this function, you just need to make sure the objects you want to add draft to are currently drawn in the component tree. Here I'm going to click on this and I just need to specify an angle, which I can do with the slider or we can enter as a numerical value. In this case I'm going to enter quite a big draft angle of 20 degrees, so this is nice and noticeable, and we'll hit apply and the software will take a few moments to process the model. So if we take a look in the 3D view, we can see the angled walls that have been created on our part, and there's nothing that's less than 20 degrees from vertical now on that component. Let's close the add draft function, and we can see that in the component tree we've got a new component that's been added to our list, which is called model with 20 degree draft. As this shape is set to merge, it just obscures our original shapes underneath it. If we undraw it, you can see our original there. In this case I'm just going to undraw the original, switch on our new one. You'll notice there something that was popping up, which is another new feature. If I hover over a component, then I get a tooltip that tells me its combine mode, whether there's any base height, and its total height. This is very useful to just hover over and see the information about the different shapes in my part. Next I'm going to come up and click on the icon here to tile the windows so we can see the 2D and 3D view. And we're going to create a vector boundary around our component so that we can start to create some toolpaths. Let's just simplify things by clicking and dragging a box around the vectors we've already used. I'm going to right mouse click and just move them onto a new layer and make that layer invisible. So we'll see those disappear even though we still have access to them. Next I'm going to select my component, click on the icon here to create a vector boundary from the selected components. And before we go over and start calculating toolpaths, let's have a look at another new feature that's been added to this version of Aspire. If we come down and click on the Drawing tab, we now have the ability to add dimensions to our part. This is not designed to make Aspire into a full-blown drafting package, but just to give you the convenience of being able to put a few spot dimensions on a drawing, perhaps to create a printout or to send an image to your customer so they can check the values. Let's come up and click on the icon here to add dimensions to the 2D drawing. In this case I'm going to adjust my decimal places to 3. I'm going to start by putting in a vertical dimension here. I'm just going to zoom out a little in the 2D view, snap to the top of the vector that we just created there, come down and snap to the bottom, and then just drag this off and click in order to create my dimension. Next I'm going to click on horizontal dimension here. I'm going to click here and just drag this down and click there in order to create that dimension there. You can see that we can adjust different aspects of these before we create a dimension, and also we can choose to place the dimensions on a specific layer as well if we want to keep things organized. In this case, let's go ahead and hit close, and I'm just going to select both of those and delete them so we can go over and start calculating the toolpaths. Let's click on our icon to go over to the Toolpath tab. As we mentioned earlier in the video, we now have this very useful summary section at the top of the Toolpath tab that shows us the basic information about our material setup and our XY datum position. If we want to change this, we can click on the Set button. In here you can see we have some of the usual functions we'd expect, such as the Z0 position, material thickness, which in this case I'm going to edit to be 1 inch thick. But we can also now change the XY datum position from within the material setup area. So I can come in here, and if I've been designing with my datum in the center of the job, I can actually change it here to be in the lower left corner without having to go back to the job setup form. This checkbox allows me to indicate how much information I want to see in the summary on the Toolpath tab. If we uncheck this, then I'll get a shorter summary. I'm going to set the gap above here to be 0.05 inches. Everything else looks reasonable, so I'm going to go ahead and hit the OK button. Next I want to come over, select my boundary vector, and then click on the icon to create a 3D roughing toolpath. In here I'm just going to hit edit. I'm going to take the tool that I've got selected there, the 1/4 inch end mill, adjust the pass depth, and take all the other parameters we've got in here, including a boundary vector offset large enough to allow my tool to fit down the side of the part. We'll change the name and hit the calculate button. Now you can see the software has automatically put us over into the preview toolpath form, and this also has a few new options in it. Now if we choose the option to animate the preview, we have the ability to adjust the speed here using the slider. We also have a button I'm going to show you in a moment which allows us to undo the last thing that we previewed before we exit the form. So let's go ahead and hit the Preview Selected Toolpath button. The software will start animating this through. If I click on the slider, you can see how that slows down the preview there so that I can see it more clearly what's happening, and then we can just click in order to increase that again if we want to hurry it up. If I'm content with the way this looks, I can go ahead and hit Close now. And next I want to calculate a finishing toolpath, so we're going to click on the 3D finishing icon. I'm going to hit Select, and from the tool database I'm going to choose an 1/8 inch M mill and hit OK. In here I'm going to start by doing an offset pattern. We've got an appropriate boundary vector offset, and again I'm just going to change the name and hit the calculate and see what that gives us. And we can go ahead and click on the button to preview the finishing toolpath. Again, we can slow it down if we have the animate preview checked, or speed it up using the slider. And if we look at that and the way it's cutting, and we decide that that is not the best way that we could finish machine it, perhaps would be better with a raster strategy, then we can go ahead and recalculate the toolpath. In previous versions of Aspire though, we would have had to come back into the preview, reset it, and started from our first toolpath and worked all the way through. Now, if we preview a toolpath and realise that we're going to change it, we can click on the button to undo last, which will take us back one stage in the preview. Now I can double click on this, change to a different strategy, hit calculate, and the preview will still be at the end of the roughing stage, so I've saved myself the bother of having to reset it and work my way through it again. This can be particularly time saving if you have toolpaths that take a long time to preview. Now with our new finishing, we can say Preview Selected Toolpath. We can see how that's going to cut, and if we're happy with it we can hit Close on the Preview Toolpath form. Last toolpath I want to create is a cutout toolpath. So with that vector selected, I'm going to click on the icon here to do a profile toolpath. A new option in this form is the ability to simplify the information that's being displayed. If you create profile toolpaths that generally don't require some of the more advanced options, then you can uncheck the box here where it says Show Advanced Toolpath Options, and you can see how that'll show you a more simplified version of the form that just gives you access to simple ramping and the ability to add tabs. If we switch this on, then you'll see that you have the access to all the functions to control the leads, more complex ramping, the order of the toolpaths, and also the way that the corners are cut. You can just choose whichever version you're more comfortable with, or you can just swap back and forward between them as it suits you. In this case, we're going to start at the top of the block, cut all the way through the material using quite a small tool. If you were going to cut this part, you'd need to make sure that you had a tool that had a long enough flute length on it in order to achieve this in whatever material you were planning to cut. Here I just want to make sure that I get nice tight corners inside of there. Going to change the name to Profile and hit the Calculate button. Next, once again, I'm going to click Preview Selected Toolpath in order to preview this. I'm going to maximize the 3D view and just take a look at the part there so we can see what we've cut. Now you may remember in previous versions of Aspire we had a button to delete waste material, but this just would get rid of the external portion of your waste material and not of pieces on the inside like these. Now we no longer have a button, and that's because we have the ability to double click on any piece of waste material in order to get rid of it from the preview. So if I want to delete what previously would have been the part of the waste material we would have got rid of, I can double click on this part here. But then now if I rotate this around, I can also come in here and double click on these pieces in order to get rid of them. This is a really nice enhancement because it allows me much more easily to create a preview that I could send to a customer to show them what the part's going to look like when it's cut. So at this stage the part's complete and we could output our toolpaths if we were happy with the way it looked. I would like to show you one more feature before we conclude though. Let's go ahead and hit the Close button here, click on the icon to go back over to the Drawing tab, and I'm going to click on the icon to tile the windows horizontally. Next I'm just going to grab the vectors in here, deselect the component, and we're just going to right mouse click and choose the option to move those onto layer 2 out of the way. Now what I want to do is create 5 copies of this component. Previously I would have just had to create 5 copies in an array and then reposition them in order to get the best yield out of my material. We didn't have the ability like we do with vectors in order to nest our component shapes. Now in Aspire 4 we are able to use components and the nesting together. So let's come up and click on the icon to adjust my job dimensions. I'm going to make the width of my job 48 inches and hit OK. Next I'm going to select my component and we can click on the icon to nest selected objects. Here I'm going to use the same nesting form we used to nest vectors. I can enter the information for my tool clearances and other spacing that I want, as well as whether I want to allow the software to rotate the part for me. I'm going to specify that I want 5 copies of this, hit apply so that it indicates that for me. And now you'll see a new feature of nesting both for components and for vectors is this preview button. Once I've set my parameters I can hit preview and the software will show me the result based on those settings. If I want to change this, then I can enter new values into here and just hit the preview button again without having to undo the previous nest. So really I can just iterate through until I'm completely content with the way the parts are nested before going ahead and hitting OK. So 2 great new additions there to the nesting. One, to be able to nest components, but also, as I said there, that preview button really helps to make sure you don't get the parts confused when you're creating nested objects, and that's whether you're working with vectors or components. So that concludes this look at some of the new features available in Aspire 4. There is another video available that covers some of the functions we haven't looked at here, such as the completely revamped 2-rail sweep and the relief multiply tool. We'll also go ahead and save this file and provide it for download on the website in the same location as the videos so that you can open it and see it in its current state and also switch on the other layer to work with the vectors if you want. Thanks for watching.